Welcome to the show, guys. Hey there, business owners, directors, and marketeers. In today's show, I'm meeting Jeremy Almond. I'm Lucas, your host as always, and I want to tell you a little bit about Jeremy before we get started with the show today. So he is a co-founder of Paystand, and he has a lot of other great qualities. He's a surfer, hacker, globetrotter, blockchain advocate, investor, a sailor as well, and has been going through an ABM program. Um, what I really like in his profile, he says he's an enjoyer of life and a doer of good. I'm really happy to learn more about that and get to know Jeremy today. So Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Glad to be here. Thanks, Lucas. Appreciate it.
Very, very good. So tell us about Paystand. What is it all about?
Yeah, so Paystand is a business-to-business payment network. So you can imagine what Venmo might be for consumers, making money movement entirely digital and cashless, and eliminating checks and cards in our life. We do for commercial transactions, generally between very fast-growing companies or large enterprise, where they're moving money between their contracts and invoices, and they need to be able to move that money in an interesting, automated way. And so what we do is we help the company speed up their time to cash, so no more checks in the mail scenario.
Yep.
Automate their process. Companies, people, you and I, we walk into Starbucks and we're able to just automatically pay something. We walk out of Uber and, money just sort of magically moves. So we help commercial companies have that same kind of experience. And then ultimately we help them reduce their cost of transaction fees, whether that's wire fees or card fees or various other sort of bank charges, because we use our own network. And that allows us to be able to use the industry's first no-fee network, which can save companies that are growing an enormous amount of money and not have to give them to the banks, but instead put that back to the bottom line of their business so they can reinvest in the business.
Very interesting. So you mentioned commercial companies there. Are there typical types of businesses that you would be usually working with? So maybe you can give us an idea of what the typical businesses be that you would work with.
Yeah, so we tend to work with relatively fast-growing companies or large enterprise. So generally, let's say somewhere between 10 million in revenue and up is usually where we start with. It's usually at a point where you've invested in a number of sort of your systems of record. So you've got a CRM in place, you've got an ERP in place, you've got all these core sort of digital systems. But what's crazy is the money part is oftentimes it's the fuel that drives the business. But oftentimes companies are getting paid in paper check. And so we come in after you've already invested in your CRM, after you've already invested in your ERP, but your revenue side is still sort of lagging behind, has not entered the digital age. And so we'll generally work with you at that point.
Very, very cool. And you mentioned the fact that you're the first 0% business payment model. Can you expand a little bit about this, and how should people think about that?
Yeah, so a lot of businesses, as the company scales, are sort of in this, I would say, problem state, which is today they might get paid in paper checks. Like it's amazing to think in the U.S. $18 trillion goes through paper checks still. And so that means that generally about half of all commercial payments are still done that way. And part of the reason why is because oftentimes as a consumer, we use our credit cards or we use Apple Pay or these sorts of things. And that uses a Visa or a MasterCard network. The way those companies, their business model works is they effectively charge about 3%. So when you swipe your card or you use your Apple Pay at a coffee shop, it charges the company, the coffee shop, about 3%. Now, 3% on a $5 cup of coffee, that's perhaps fair. It's not too egregious. But my kind of customers that I work with, they might be sending an invoice to somebody for $10,000 or $100,000 that they've worked with for a decade. They've negotiated a contract. So can you imagine paying 3% on $100,000? That would be egregious to give the banks thousands of dollars to move money from one place to another with companies that you worked with for a long time. And so what we found is the consumer payment model, which is going through a massive amount of innovation, effectively doesn't work for the commercial use cases. And so commercial use cases amazingly still live in this paper-based world that was quite frankly built in the Middle Ages. And so we come in and we help transform all of that.
Very, very interesting. So how would you describe, how do companies find Paystand and get to know about the system and even get started? What would be a typical user journey be looking like, given that a lot of them are, as you say, in the sort of paper-based model at the moment?
Yeah, so they're in a digital transformation that happens. So oftentimes they've bought, let's say, Oracle NetSuite, and they bought Salesforce. So their companies, their contracts, and their what's called the receivable, their general ledger starts being digital and in the cloud. And so it's pretty common for a CFO to go, wow, how is it that all of the information about my customer is now digital in the cloud and helps us be more competitive and helps our head of sales be able to sell more and helps our finance team be able to run reports better. But then we still have a human that's trying to track down some payment. That's crazy. And so the journey is oftentimes after they've invested in those cloud systems, at some point someone goes, well, maybe we need to start taking digital payments. Then they look at an option, which would be to take credit cards, and they say, well, that's not going to work. Now what? And we're their main choice.
Got you. And how do they find you? Is that mainly through content, or what is something that you found to be, a good starting point to get in contact with those types of companies that are having gone through that process?
Yeah, so we use a mixture of channels. So we create great, compelling content for those CFOs that are oftentimes looking for, okay, now what do I do about my billing now that I've installed accounting software, ERP software, that sort of thing. So we create great content around that. We have a strong sales team that does some outbound sales. And then we also work with those systems of record. We partner very closely with the CRMs and the ERPs. We have incredible relationships with them. And so that helps as well, because it helps their businesses. These are much larger companies than us, but if they sell the CFO on a digital financial system, but the revenue is still manual, that's not great, right? And so it often helps complete the last mile. So we work hand in glove with a lot of those partners, the Oracles of the world, and folks like that.
That makes total sense. So you mentioned outbound and inbound there happening at the same time. Could you tell me a bit about the role of your website in that sort of construct? What role does the website play? Is it more an informational hub, or is it really something that is key to the business?
Yeah, I mean, we think that the website we look at as strategic to help customers, prospects on their journey. So it may be that you first are looking for information around digital payments and commercial payment infrastructure, and so you might be at the very top end of the journey, or our website can be a place where it actually drives leads directly to the sales team. So oftentimes we'll look at the customer and where they're at in their journey, but the website is very, very central to the process, of course.
Got you. And that's interesting, because I've been speaking with a lot of SaaS founders about this, because the website playing a key role, but then there's tons of metrics that one could be looking at in terms of the website. What is sort of the one or two key metrics for you where you think, okay, I'm looking at those to steer the business from a website angle?
Yeah, I mean, so we tend to run the business sort of this notion that's pretty traditional. You have sort of leads and prospects, which are coming in. They're at a certain part on the website. So those are things like visitors, how long you've been there, how engaged are you with the content, how many webinars have you visited, how many pieces of data sheets have you done, and so that's important, particularly because it helps us know where they're at in the journey. They might be researching things that are what we might be considered cutting edge, things like blockchain, or how does commercial payment infrastructure. So we know where they're at in the journey, and then as our website basically does lead scoring, and so as the companies have higher scores, we're able to sort of funnel them into a point when they're ready to talk to a sales representative, and the sales representative usually takes over from the marketing qualified lead to the sales qualified lead. And those are usually when folks are ready to have somebody to help advise them. And oftentimes at that point, we will run what we call an ROI analysis. So we'll actually walk with the customer through and say, hey, now that we know you're looking at this journey around digitizing your revenue platform, let's look at all the ways that it's going to drive you ROI. So we'll say, how much time are you spending to actually go collect your revenue, and how many missed payments are you doing, and how is that affecting your customer experience, and how often are you having to actually track down late payments, right? And that all costs you money, right? Time is money. And then how much do you have humans that are actually doing all of this reconciliation process that costs you money, right? So labor and time is money. So how do you become more digital and automated in that process? And then how much are you spending for to the banks, whether that's wire fees or card fees or fees like that. And so we're able to look at all of that. And so one of our customer representatives will take over from there and basically run through an ROI analysis for them. And that's part of our sales process. And it helps the CFO feel like the investment in a company like us is going to be significant, because we're going to take them on what we call the journey to zero. We're going to help eliminate all those fees, help automate the process, and they're able to see in a very dollars and cents bottom line kind of way.
That's an awesome journey to be on. The journey to zero, really like it. Very cool. Okay, that sounds really interesting. I was curious though, you mentioned the lead scoring. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about how you actually do lead scoring? Is that based on certain actions people do on the website, or certain elements that they would download? Maybe you can give us a glimpse into that, because I guess a lot of folks listening are looking to, find the right qualification ways on their website for their clients.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways, lead scoring is the tactic, but the really core strategy is you really need to understand who your buyer is. It's really, really important, and who maybe the champions are, and so understanding the personas of the people that are coming to your website is really important, because you want messaging that reaches them. And so for us, that means that we oftentimes will work with the controller or the accounts receivable person. They're oftentimes our champions. They'll come in and they'll be really excited about payments as a service, which is how our platform works. They're usually in the grind. They're the ones that are oftentimes doing a lot of the manual work. And so we're able to score not only what industry you are, what size of company you are, what persona are you? Are you the buyer? Are you the influencer? How engaged are you? So all of those things play a role in the scoring. But the scoring at the end of the day is really trying to get at is the person at a place where they're far enough in the journey where you're not wasting their time by spending time talking to them. You want people who are far enough in the journey, who actually are ready to buy and have questions. And you really need to know, I think one of the things that startups oftentimes do is they try to sell way too broadly. And so we really want to sort of hit at the heart of the problem. And so it's important to not boil the ocean, but really sort of manage to the right kinds of customers. And so we spend a lot of time there, because if you win in one area and you win in it well, then you can keep growing.
Very, very cool. And thanks for sharing. It really is, I think it's really, really helpful for listeners. Is there, maybe one last question on that? Is there anything that you've learned, any war stories to share maybe on how to improve the conversions on the page? Because you mentioned, there might be, a step where they're going through your page, getting content, and then at some point getting contact with your team. Anything that you've learned in order to increase conversions from your page?
I'll say something counterintuitive, which is sometimes you want to decrease conversion. So particularly when you're handing off from the web page to somebody on the sales side, it's important to have a highly qualified lead. And so there's cases where maybe the conversion funnel at the top end looks nicer by optimizing. But one of the things that can sometimes do is get a prospect who's not ready. Mm-hmm. And so I think one of the biggest things that we as a company is that's scaling right now, and we're growing really, really rapidly, tend to do now at this point is know when to say no more. And ideally, you're not saying no at the time that you're talking to someone, because it's sort of a waste of both people's times. But instead, qualify much more upfront in the forms, in the sets of questions that you're asking on the website, in the content you're delivering, because you'd rather sort of know that person's sort of not ready yet, and give them great content before and to get them ready, versus get them farther down the funnel where maybe the website conversion looks good, but it ultimately is not a great use of everybody's time. So I would say focus more on where you need to say no, not just where you need to say yes.
Very, very good. And have you optimized that process yet already? Because I think there's probably a lot of variables at play, people being at different stages in their journey. Something you can maybe share on how you've optimized that the right people end up at the right place?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so ideally you want a great marketing and sales team that's working very closely hand in hand, because you know the optimization you might do in your sort of inbound system. For example, we use HubSpot. Um, that in a vacuum can look nice, but you really need a feedback loop from sales. So I think the critical thing is sales can actually talk sort of what's going on at the front line that can give feedback to the marketing team for the marketing team to do further optimization, to say, okay, well, you need to tweak this persona, or change the scoring criteria in this sort of way. And so I think those two teams really need to work hand in glove for the optimization to actually work properly at the bottom line.
Very, very cool. Maybe one last question on this before we sort of switching back into learning a bit about you as a founder. And anything that you've learned that makes this work together between marketing and sales to be working particularly well? Because obviously a lot of teams have that challenge, and sometimes the teams sort of grow apart a little bit. Something that you learned on how to let them sort of work closely?
I mean, I think helping align like the goals for both organizations is really important, and then sharing the data pretty aggressively. So I think you know that the organization's in better shape when you're seeing the sales leader feedback to the marketing leader. Okay, here's actually what we're seeing farther down the funnel, and vice versa. It's also one of the areas where I think, especially as a company is growing, until you get to a certain stage, have as much integration into the systems as possible is important. So it can be easy to have a separate marketing system, inbound marketing system that's completely separate from the sales system. And at some point, the company will get large enough, you may need that. But I see too often companies don't really have an integrated sort of set of data. And if the teams don't agree on what's true, and if the teams don't agree on what actually are the core numbers, it becomes very, very hard. And the thing is, I think at some level, in this day and age, it's easy. You almost have too much data, so you really need to focus on what matters. So what matters is revenue, customers, right? Some certain levels of conversion, and how the sales folks are doing on the front line. So
very, very cool. Thanks a lot for that. So let's switch gears a little bit and take the last couple of minutes to learn from you and your journey as a founder a little bit. Maybe you can sort of bring me back to the days of the first 10 customers. Do you remember how you got them and what was the way of winning them for your solution?
Yeah, I mean, I think that journey changes a lot over time. I think as a founder in the early days, you really are responsible for getting the first sets of customers. A few things will generally happen. The first sets of customers are probably people in your network or some degree related. And then after that, what often happens is, you become responsible, I'd say, after the first 10 customers to find the first, let's say, the next 10 customers that aren't actually related to you. I think that's actually arguably the hardest part in the journey, is going from your first sets of customers, which are really more like, friends and network, to moving into a stage where these are people who bought because of the value of the service and the product, not simply because they were willing to try the product, right? And so I think that's the point where you really have to relentlessly focus on a great product that creates incredible value for the customers. And if you can prove that, if you can get that set of customers that doesn't have any relationship to you, maybe they didn't buy as sort of at the price point that you in the long run think the company will mature to, but they bought because there was real value independent of a network or relationship or otherwise. That's when you're onto something. And particularly in SaaS, if you keep doing that, your progress compounds.
Really, really cool. Could you give us a feeling of time for that sort of next 10 customers after the initial 10? Are we talking like a couple of weeks, month, a year, more?
It depends on the size of company and who you're targeting. So, if you're targeting SMBs, that it should happen quickly, in the week zone, certainly at latest in the months. If you're targeting the mid-market and up like we do, it's probably it's a slightly slower feedback loop. So let's say it's probably in the months zone. What I would say maybe one of the biggest things I generally share to founders that are doing it for the first time is I often see too much of a fail fast mentality. And the reality is to get to that next step of the unaffiliated customers is a lot harder than you think. And so it's fascinating to me when you're a first time founder, and I think I made this mistake myself. You often will spend a lot of time on the product, with months, maybe even a couple years, to get it out the door and get it to a place. But oftentimes you might set yourself too short on how long it's going to take for you to get that first set of unaffiliated customers. And that's, I would say, as long as it takes you to build the first MVP of product, expect it to take at least that long for your first unaffiliated set of customers. And one of the challenges for early stage companies is they'll oftentimes there's almost like they get a little tired because, you've been working on product for a while. You get a first 10 customers, you're kind of tired. But it's actually I would say one of the most pivotal moments of the early stage company is the part where you need that second win to get that set of unaffiliated customers.
This is really, really great information. I think I completely see that in a lot of the conversations that we have there. So thanks for sharing that. That's really cool. Maybe the last two questions before we're slowly wrapping it up. So one question would be, how do you educate yourself as a founder, sort of to be a better founder and CEO and leader, I should say, today than yesterday? Certain platforms, is there blogs that you're reading? Is there a network of founders that you're sort of in touch with? What's the way for you to basically upskill?
Yeah, I think most founders probably read voraciously, which is very important to do, and certainly that's true with me. I think it's so important to be around other sort of peers, because there's just stuff that's hard to talk about if you're not talking to other founders. And so you tend to learn a lot. I think finding folks, particularly both at your stage, and that's good because it's sort of peer mentorship. And then it's important to have somebody who's like a stage in front of you, because they're sort of your Sherpa. They help you sort of ask the questions that you don't know to ask yet. And so I think that's really important. Is you don't need somebody who's some celebrity supersized person. I think oftentimes the most helpful people is a person that's like one stage ahead of you. So I think that's extremely important. And then I think as the companies get a little bit larger, having enough humility and sort of servant leadership to hire executives who are better than you in the key functional areas. You'd be surprised at how much you learn with somebody who, whether it's a sales leader or product leader or whatever, who've been doing their craft for 10, 15, 20 years. And maybe you're a really good generalist, or maybe you're really good at engineering or various things. But you'll learn a lot from your peers as long as you sort of keep a humble, open mind and really think of your role as an enablement role. How do you help people who are smarter than you succeed and grow? So
very, very good. So let's wrap this up with one last question, which would be, if you would have to restart Paystand today, sort of zooming back into that day, what would be one advice that you would give yourself?
Yeah, it's hindsight's always 20/20. So I think one of the advices that's easy to give but hard to do, especially as an early stage company, is optimize for success. And so I think one of the things that we did as a company is we tended to we're moving commercial payments, which means we move very large sums of money. So you can't be like a social network where you fail fast and break stuff, right? It's $1 billion of the company's money in the wrong place is very important. And so we took security and trust very seriously. But what that meant was probably our earliest customers tended to be a little bit smaller customers. And the reality is our company's value prop actually gets better the bigger the customer is, the farther in the journey. And so I think if we would have done it over, we probably would have much more early gone after the types of companies that we knew we were going to sell in the long run. And I think we had a little bit of an aw shucks kind of view where we felt like we weren't mature enough to sell to a really large organization. And I think if I would do this over again, I think it would have saved a lot of time to really nail the persona that you eventually are trying to get to, and actually tried to get there earlier in the journey of the company growth.
Very, very good. Very, very good. Thanks a lot, Jeremy, for all these insights. We learned about your company. We learned about how you're thinking about growth and also what you learned as a founder on your journey as well. So thanks for being part of the show today.
Awesome, Lucas. Well, love being on. I appreciate it. I'm sure you have some great entrepreneurs and executives in the audience. And so it's always great to be able to touch base with you in the audience. Thanks, Lucas.